What if I told you that the fastest growing religious group in America isn't a church at all? It's people who don't go to church. And this number is absolutely staggering. In 1990, only 5% of Americans claimed no religious affiliation. Today, that number has skyrocketed to nearly 25%, a quarter of the entire American population. We're not just talking about a decline in church attendance. We're talking about a fundamental collapse of organized religion as we know it. And here's the really shocking part. It's not just older people leaving church. It's young people. Millennials and Gen Z are abandoning Christianity at a rate we've never seen before. Some estimates suggest that by 2050, the majority of Americans could be religiously unaffiliated. So the question becomes, is organized religion dying? And if it is, what will replace it? Because here's what nobody's talking about as churches are emptying. Artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly sophisticated. And for the first time in human history, we're facing a future where people might seek spiritual guidance, not from a pastor in a church, but from an AI on their phone. This is the conversation we need to have right now. Let's first understand who these people are. We call them the nones people, who, when asked about their religious affiliation, answer none. But here's the thing that most people get wrong. The nones aren't atheists. They're not anti-religion. Many of them still believe in God. Many of them still pray. Many of them still consider themselves spiritual. What they've rejected is organized religion. They've rejected the institutional church. And this is a critical distinction that church leadership hasn't fully grasped yet. A few years ago, researchers started interviewing nuns to understand why they left church. The answers were remarkably consistent. They talked about hypocrisy in the church. They talked about feeling judged. They talked about the church's stance on LGBTQ issues, evolution, and science. They talked about feeling like their questions weren't being answered, but rather dismissed. But most importantly, they talked about feeling abandoned by the church when they needed it most. They said the church cared more about doctrine than about their actual lives, more about collecting tithes than about genuine community, more about maintaining power than about serving people. So the nones didn't leave because they stopped believing. They left because they felt the church stopped believing in them. So let's break down the 4 major reasons why people are abandoning organized religion in America. The first reason is institutional hypocrisy. Look at what we've seen in recent decades. Megachurch pastors living lavish lifestyles while preaching about simplicity. Church leaders involved in sex abuse scandals. Pastors who preach about loving your neighbor, but vote for policies that hurt the poor. The disconnect between Christian teaching and Christian behavior has become impossible to ignore. Young people especially are calling this out. They see a pastor condemning homosexuality from the pulpit, while that same pastor's church ignores the homeless person sleeping outside their building. They see churches that claim to follow Jesus, teaching a gospel of prosperity and wealth accumulation. They see Christian nationalism, where American patriotism is conflated with Christian faith. And they're saying, this isn't what Jesus taught. This isn't what I signed up for. The second reason is cultural rigidity. The church has become increasingly disconnected from modern reality. We live in a world of rapid social change, scientific discovery, and evolving moral understanding. But many churches are still operating with a 1950s worldview. Take the issue of LGBTQ acceptance. Mainstream society has moved toward greater inclusion and acceptance. But many churches are still teaching that homosexuality is sinful. Young people grow up with LGBTQ friends and classmates. They see nothing wrong with them. And when their church tells them these people are going to hell, it creates a cognitive dissonance that becomes impossible to reconcile. Or take science. Evolution is accepted by 97% of scientists worldwide. Climate change is real. Vaccines work. But some churches are still preaching against these scientific facts from the pulpit. Young people who study science in school and then hear their pastor deny scientific reality don't trust the pastor. And if they can't trust the pastor on science, how can they trust them on spiritual matters? The third reason is spiritual shallowness. Many modern churches have become entertainment centers rather than places of genuine spiritual depth. You go to church, you hear a motivational speech disguised as a sermon, you listen to contemporary Christian music, and you go home feeling uplifted, but not transformed. Real spiritual practice requires depth. It requires wrestling with difficult questions. It requires community that challenges you to grow. But many churches have abandoned this in favor of feel-good messages and production value. The sermon becomes TED Talkish. The music becomes indistinguishable from secular pop music. And the community becomes a collection of consumers rather than a genuine faith community. Nuns tell researchers that they're actually spiritual. They meditate, they practice yoga, they read books on spirituality, they seek meaning in nature, but they don't find that depth in church, so they look for it elsewhere. The fourth reason is lack of social relevance. The church used to be the social institution. It was the place where communities gathered. It was the voice for justice. It was the safety net for those in crisis. But that role has been largely replaced by government programs, nonprofits, and community organizations. Meanwhile, on major social issues, the church's voice has become increasingly marginalized, or worse, on the wrong side of history. For decades, the church was complicit in racism. Many churches supported segregation. Today, many churches are indifferent to racial injustice. On issues like income inequality, gun violence, immigration, and climate change, young people expect the church to be a prophetic voice for justice. But instead, many churches are silent or actively opposing justice-oriented policies. So young people ask themselves, why do I need the church? I can find community elsewhere. I can find spirituality elsewhere. And the church isn't even standing up for justice. So what's the point? Now here's where it gets really interesting. As people are leaving organized religion, they're not abandoning spirituality. They're just expressing it differently. We're seeing the rise of what researchers call the spiritual, but not religious movement. This includes people who practice meditation and mindfulness, people who read spiritual self-help books, people who attend yoga classes for the spiritual component, not just the physical exercise, people who find spiritual meaning in nature, in art, in relationships, people who are deeply ethical and moral, but don't attend church or identify with a specific religious tradition. In fact, some of the most spiritually serious people I know don't go to church. They spend time in silent contemplation. They're deeply committed to social justice. They live with intentionality and purpose. They're trying to figure out how to be a good person and make a positive impact on the world. The church used to be the institution that facilitated this spiritual journey, but it's not anymore. The institutional church has become a barrier to spirituality rather than a gateway. And here's the thing that should really concern church leaders: these spiritual, but not religious people are growing rapidly. They're the fastest growing demographic. They're not hostile to religion. Many of them were raised Christian. They're just not interested in organized religion anymore. Now, while all of this is happening, something else is happening simultaneously. Artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly sophisticated, and for the first time in human history, AI is starting to enter the domain of spiritual guidance and meaning-making. Think about what ChatGPT can do. You can ask it deep philosophical questions. It can engage in nuanced discussions about ethics, meaning, and purpose. It can recommend spiritual practices. It can explain religious texts. It can even engage in something that looks like empathy and understanding. And early research shows that people are using AI for exactly this. People are asking AI for advice on personal problems. They're asking AI to help them work through moral dilemmas. They're asking AI to interpret religious texts. They're seeking spiritual guidance from an artificial intelligence. Now, the church's first instinct is to say, that's ridiculous. An AI can't provide spiritual guidance. And in many ways, that's true. An AI doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have a soul. It can't truly understand human suffering. It can't offer genuine compassion. But here's the problem. Many people don't feel like they're getting genuine compassion from church either. They don't feel understood by their pastor. They don't feel like their questions are being taken serious. So when an AI listens to them without judgment, responds thoughtfully, and doesn't condemn them, it actually feels better than their church experience. And as AI gets more sophisticated, this problem is only going to get worse. Imagine an AI that can provide personalized spiritual guidance based on your specific beliefs and doubts. Imagine an AI that can engage in deep theological discussion. 247. Without judgment. Imagine an AI that can recommend spiritual practices tailored to your life circumstances. Imagine an AI that can connect with a global community of people seeking meaning. Imagine an AI that can help you live out your values in concrete ways. These aren't theoretical. These are things that are being actively developed right now. So the church faces an existential question. Can it compete with AI? Or more importantly, should it try to? Now, before you think I'm suggesting that AI is the future of spirituality, let me be clear. It's not. AI will never be able to replace what genuine spiritual community offers. Here's why. Spirituality at its core is about transformation. It's about becoming a different person. It's about being loved unconditionally. It's about belonging to something larger than yourself. It's about making a concrete difference in the world. An AI can provide information. An AI can simulate understanding. But an AI cannot actually love you. It cannot be changed by your presence. It cannot sacrifice for you. It cannot mourn with you when you grieve. It cannot celebrate with you when you celebrate. Real spirituality happens in relationship. It happens when another human being sees you fully, your brokenness, your fears, your doubts, and still chooses to love you and walk with you. That's what the church should be. That's what Jesus modeled. But here's the tragedy: most modern churches aren't offering that either. So people don't feel the difference between a compassionate AI and their church community, because their church community doesn't feel that different from an AI. The church has become transactional. You come to the service, you receive the message, you leave. You don't have deep relationships with other church members. You don't feel genuinely known. You don't feel like your unique gifts and struggles matter to the community. So the solution isn't for the church to compete with AI by becoming more technological. The solution is for the church to become more deeply human, more relational, more genuinely communal. So what does the church need to do to survive and thrive in the AI age? I think there are 5 key transformations. First, the church needs to embrace radical transparency and accountability. In the AI age, information flows freely. Hypocrisy is impossible to hide. So the church needs to get ahead of this by voluntarily being transparent about finances, leadership decisions, and institutional problems. This means publishing detailed financial statements. This means having genuine conversations about scandals and failures. This means having diverse voices in leadership, including women, LGBTQ people, and people of color. This means being willing to change positions when presented with new evidence or new moral understanding. The days of the pastor as an unquestioned authority figure are over. The church needs to shift to a model of shared leadership and genuine accountability to the community. Second, the church needs to reconnect with its prophetic voice on justice. Throughout history, the church has been at its best when it was speaking truth to power and standing with the marginalized. Think of the civil rights movement. Think of the abolition movement. Think of the early Christians who refused to participate in empire. In the AI age, we're going to face new justice questions. How do we ensure that AI doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities? How do we protect workers whose jobs are being displaced by AI? How do we ensure that AI development is done ethically and with the input of diverse communities? The church should be leading these conversations, not from the sidelines, but from the center. The church should be the voice, calling us to consider how technological development affects the most vulnerable. The church should be demanding that AI be developed in service of human flourishing, not just corporate profit. Third, the church needs to prioritize genuine community over entertainment. Many modern churches have become performance-driven. The focus is on attendance numbers, on how many people showed up, on the production quality of the service. But real community can't be scaled. Real community is small. It's intimate. It's where people know each other deeply, where they can be vulnerable, where they can ask hard questions, where they can genuinely support each other through life's challenges. This means the church needs to move away from megachurches towards smaller, more intimate communities. It means prioritizing small group discussions over large productions. It means creating spaces where people can wrestle with difficult, theological, and ethical questions. It means building communities that are known for their genuine love and support, not for their impressive buildings or charismatic preachers. Fourth, the church needs to engage seriously with modern intellectual challenges. The church has largely ceded the intellectual high ground to secular institutions. When young Christians encounter arguments against their faith in university, they don't have good answers because their churches never taught them how to engage seriously with these questions. This needs to change. The church should be hosting conversations with scientists about evolution and faith, with philosophers about suffering and evil, with economists about justice and inequality, with psychologists about trauma and healing, with theologians about difficult biblical passages and theological traditions. These conversations shouldn't be defensive. They should be genuine inquiries into truth. Because if Christianity is true, it shouldn't be threatened by honest questions. Fifth, the church needs to embrace spiritual depth and ancient practices. One reason people are turning away from Christianity is that modern churches often feel spiritually shallow, but the Christian tradition has incredibly rich spiritual practices: contemplative prayer, lectio divina, liturgical worship, fasting, pilgrimage. Many of these practices have been abandoned in favor of contemporary worship and motivational preaching. But young people are actually hungry for depth. They're seeking out meditation apps, yoga classes, and spiritual retreats because their churches aren't offering genuine spiritual practice. The church should reclaim these practices, not in a nostalgic way, but in a way that speaks to contemporary seekers. Contemplative prayer can meet people who are stressed and anxious. Liturgical worship can provide stability and meaning. Fasting can be a spiritual discipline in a culture of consumption. These ancient practices are more relevant now than ever. Now here's the real question. Can AI and authentic Christianity coexist, or are they fundamentally opposed? I think they can coexist, but only if the church transforms itself. Here's what I mean. AI should not replace human spiritual direction, community, and genuine pastoral care. These are things only humans can provide. But AI could potentially assist in providing information, connecting people with resources, and facilitating certain kinds of learning. For example, imagine an AI that helps church members understand theological concepts. Imagine an AI that connects isolated believers with remote communities. Imagine an AI that helps identify people in crisis who need pastoral care. Imagine an AI that assists in sermon preparation or provides information about biblical scholarship. These are all potentially helpful uses of AI. They're tools that serve human connection and community, not replace. But here's the line that cannot be crossed. AI cannot replace the human pastor who sits with a grieving family. AI cannot replace the small group that gathers weekly to study scripture and pray together. AI cannot replace the mission trip where Christians go into the world to serve others. AI cannot replace the genuine human relationship that is at the heart of the Christian faith. The danger is that churches will start using AI as a substitute for these things. That churches will offer an AI chatbot for spiritual guidance instead of training pastors to listen well. That churches will offer virtual community instead of real community. That churches will use AI to scale their reach instead of deepening their impact. If that happens, then AI will have truly killed Christianity. Not because AI is inherently hostile to faith, but because the church will have abandoned what makes faith real. Here's the thing about this moment. It's both an incredible opportunity and a severe warning. It's an opportunity because the emptying of churches could force institutional Christianity to finally confront its failures and transform itself. Maybe the nones leaving isn't a tragedy. Maybe it's a wake-up call. Maybe it's forcing the church to ask, why should people come? What are we actually offering? Are we faithful to our founding principles? Are we making a difference? If the church takes this seriously, it could genuinely transform into something more faithful, more prophetic, and more loving. It could become a real alternative to the consumer capitalism and shallow individualism of modern American culture. It could become a genuine community of transformation and justice. But it's also a warning, because if the church doesn't transform, it will continue to empty. And as it empties, people's spiritual needs won't disappear. Those needs will be met somewhere else. Some of those places will be helpful meditation apps, yoga studios, nature retreats. But some of those places will be harmful conspiracy movements, cults, parasitic spiritual gurus, or just isolation and alienation. And then there's the question of AI. If humanity is going to navigate the AI revolution ethically, we need wisdom. We need moral guidance. We need communities that are thinking deeply about what it means to be human in an age of artificial intelligence. The church should be leading that conversation, but it can't lead if it's dead. So the stakes are incredibly high. This isn't just about whether churches survive. It's about whether we have moral and spiritual wisdom as we face the biggest technological revolution in human history. Let me paint a vision of what could happen if the church truly transformed. Imagine a future where churches are small but deeply connected communities, where people know each other intimately, where vulnerability is safe, where genuine spiritual growth happens, where people are transformed into more loving, just, and compassionate human beings. Imagine churches that are at the forefront of conversations about AI ethics, where engineers and theologians work together to ensure technology serves human flourish, where church leaders are speaking prophetically about the impacts of automation on workers, where the church is advocating for policies that protect human dignity in an age of artificial intelligence. Imagine churches where the pastor is not a celebrity, but a spiritual guide who genuinely knows their congregation, who sits with people in their suffering, who challenges them to live out their values, who works alongside them in service to others. Imagine churches that are racially diverse, LGBTQ, affirming, and genuinely inclusive, where women serve in all levels of leadership, where the poor are not marginalized, but centered, where the church is actually modeling a different way of being human. Imagine churches connected across continents through technology, but bonded together by genuine commitment to Jesus' teachings. Small communities that are part of something larger, that can share resources, wisdom, and support across vast distances. This kind of church wouldn't be competing with AI. It wouldn't feel like a performance or a transaction. It would be offering something unique and irreplaceable. Genuine human community in service of God and justice. Is this possible? Yes. Will it happen? Only if church leaders take the current crisis seriously and commit to real transformation. So here's my final question for you. Do you believe the church can change? Do you think it's worth saving? Because that answer matters. If you think the church is beyond redemption, then it probably is. But if you think it's worth fighting for, if you believe that authentic Christian community is possible and vital, then you need to demand transformation. If you're a church leader, stop defending the status quo. Start listening to why people are leaving. Start asking hard questions about whether your church is faithful to Jesus' teachings. Start making the difficult changes necessary for genuine transformation. If you're someone who's left the church, consider whether there might be a renewed Christianity worth your participation. Not the Christianity you rejected, but a Christianity that's prophetic, inclusive, authentic, and deeply committed to justice and spiritual depth. If you're someone who's still in the church, start asking questions. Challenge your pastor on the difficult issues. Demand accountability. Push for change. Don't settle for shallow spirituality and institutional comfort. This moment is critical. The church is at a crossroad. It can either transform or fade away. And honestly, that might be okay. Maybe a smaller, more authentic Christianity is what the world needs right now. But if you believe, as I do, that there's something vital about Christian faith and community, then now is the time to fight for its transformation. Not to defend what it's been, but to imagine what it could become. The AI age is coming. The knowns are rising. The future is uncertain. But one thing is certain. The church, as it has existed for the past several decades, is not sustainable. The only question is whether it will die or whether it will finally become what Jesus intended. What do you think? Can the church be renewed? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this message resonates with you, please subscribe and hit that like button. We need this conversation to happen in churches and living rooms across America.